What I wanted to talk to you today about is just the story of the IPA. Very briefly, might be pleased to know, probably a story that's reasonably well known, I hope at least, to you all. And just touch on a few key points that Wendy just mentioned before in a bit more detail as to why we are in the position that we are in. And so that's very much about this notion of being, tomorrow unfolded is the theme of the presentation. I think importantly, what we're talking about is the organisation and the future of the profession, how we're positioning you and your skills and competencies to meet the demands of the profession tomorrow, and importantly, the needs of clients and the businesses you work in. So I'll go through that shortly. Then it will be my task to reveal to you, because it's probably not a great secret, the venue for the 2015 National Congress, and I'll be introducing our first keynote speaker. And we're delighted to have Nicola Roxon with us, the Chair of the Accountants Professional and Ethical Standards Board. Great way to start the Congress with the rules and regulations about professional ethical standards. So we're delighted to have you with us, Nicola. So let's get into the presentation. I'll try and sail through this pretty promptly and just touch on a few key points. And as I said, we're pretty proud of where we're standing today as an organisation. I'll talk briefly about the state of the Institute. So a very quick overview as to some of those key stats that Wendy talked to before about the organisation and where we've come from. We'll look back for a short moment to then cast our eyes forward and consider where the organisation, particularly where the profession's going. Look at the future of accounting and where our organisation and our members are positioned. Talk about the Australian Small Business White Paper that we're delighted to be facilitating the leadership of and actually driving the agenda in relation to small business. And then talk about what role will accountants have in the 21st century. We've been pretty active in this space of the future series in accounting, and it's a conversation we're delighted to be a big part of. So in terms of the state of the Institute, as Wendy talked about, and as we've talked about a little now, we've got a very comprehensive Fit for the Future program. It's our strategy that actually commenced back in 2009, and it was part of the integrated plan to rebrand and reposition the Institute. And so that's now been delivered, and we now continue, if you like, phase two. So rebrand, repositioning, tick. Phase two really is about the operational efficiencies and the organisational efficiencies to drive the growth of the profession and lead our segment. There was some time ago that you might recall the organisation was trying to be all things to all accountants, and we know that that's really difficult to do. It's a very broad-ranging profession with a range of competencies, range of needs in it. And so to trying to be all things to all accountants is really difficult. So the organisation took a very bold move and said, almost 3/4 of our members work in and with small business every day, either with clients or within SMEs themselves as the accountant within that business. Notwithstanding the fact we have members in public sector, in the not-for-profit space, in academia and so forth. But more than 2/3, almost 3/4 of our members live and work in the SME space every day. It's the biggest segment of the economy. Yet for some reason, going back a couple of years, there was a reluctance to actually acknowledge that and celebrate it. So our view was that there's a massive need to take that mantle up on behalf of our members and importantly on behalf of the economy to provide a strong voice for the small business sector. So that's led to our leadership positions in the profession. And I just briefly wanted to talk about some of those leadership positions, because it's fair to say that we haven't pleased everyone all the time in some of the positions we've taken. And that's in some way in response to a board strategy. When I was appointed, the board set a strategy and a task for me to create a disturbance, of the organisation to create a disturbance. And recently I think the board said, well, the organisation's done that. But I think it's not disturbance for disturbance sake. And so we've taken some very strong positions on a range of matters. And I am delighted that Nicola is here today from the APSB, because we know that our position that we took in relation to the Financial Advisory Standard, APES 230, and we don't shy away from those discussions, and I know Nicola doesn't either, was a bold thing to do. There were very strong representations from members and others about the standard, and we felt that it was important to listen to those views and to then articulate those views to the standard setter and to articulate why we thought there was a need for our view to prevail. The standard setter, in its wisdom and in its right, as we would hope it does as an independent standard setter, opted for APES 230, and that's fine. So our commitment has been to make sure that we have that open dialogue, and Nicola and I have that dialogue, and the organisation has the dialogue with the APES board, to explain why we believe our pronouncement was right, but importantly understand the rationale of APES 230, because I don't think it's in anyone's interest to have a situation where there's standard arbitrage, where people are moving between standards. And so our commitment is to continue that dialogue with the APES board to say, I know Nicola doesn't like referring to it as the APES board, but we all do. But to have the conversation with the APES board to actually articulate why we still believe pronouncement 11 is right. We do believe we act in the public interest and in our members' interest, importantly, about making sure that we keep accountants in the profession. The dilemma that we faced was that accountants were leaving the profession. And in our view, that was a concern in terms of the longer-term public interest. It is not in Australia's public interest and the public interest of Australians to have accountants leaving the profession. And so, having done that, and there's been much water going under the bridge with that, certainly the conversations we have with the APES board and with the new chair is along the lines of, let's work to bring the standards together. Let's work to have one rule that governs financial advisory services provided by accountants to avoid that gap and to make sure we have consistency across the profession. And we're delighted to have that ongoing dialogue with the APES board about that. So we have undertaken a complete overhaul of our member experience, and that's been buffered by the fact we have a new member experience team that looks at our education programs and the way in which our education programs are plugging into the needs of the profession as well. We've built in financial planning into our program, into the IPA program, and importantly rolled in small and medium enterprise management into the IPA program. You know, we are still the only professional accounting body in the world to offer a Masters of Commerce in Professional Accounting as our professional program. So a Masters of Commerce is the IPA program, unlike any other in the world, and we believe that's right, having a solid academic base to drive our professional program, mixed with the professional competence requirements and mentored experience. And we have maintained that relentless focus on sustainable membership growth. You know, I'm sure you appreciate that it's pretty easy as professional bodies just to lower standards of entry to get some growth. So the organisation's had a very strong focus, led by the board, on making sure that our entry programs maintain a vigilance on quality coming into the profession, going into our program. And so we are still very pleased with the fact that the IPA is one of the only professional bodies that still mandates an accounting qualification for entry, a statutory qualification for entry, mixed with our Masters of Commerce qualification as an academic program and our mentored experience program, followed by our practice orientation program. It's a very comprehensive orientation practice. This is, there'll be a short test on this later. This is the IPA strategy map, and we won't go into it in detail, you're probably pleased to know. I just wanted to put it up to show you, we've adopted a balanced scorecard approach in relation to our organisation, which is new, and in the last 12 months this has really taken us a long way down the track. And we have a strategy and partnerships unit that now drives the engine behind this strategy map that actually takes us across the business. In a very quick overview, the items down the left-hand side talk about members and stakeholders, financial perspective, internal processes, and organisational capacity. What we're really talking about, they are the perspectives of the organisation, perspectives of our institute as a business, because at the end of the day, you pay your membership fees to us, and we are a business, and we see it very much as that in that construct. But then across each of those dark grey boxes are actually strategic objectives that we have within the business. So what they're designed to do is lead from the point of view of organisational capacity and capabilities up to our slicker internal processes to ultimately overall drive a better financial outcome for the business in terms of doing things in a more efficient way, which will all enable us with a better surplus to reinvest the surpluses as a company limited by guarantee, reinvest those retained funds back into the organisation for greater brand awareness and greater recognition, which will in turn grow our membership. So it provides us a sequence of events to actually drive our strategy, and that, if you like, if we were to extend the strategy map across, this would then go to our initiatives and straight into our budget. So we actually have a sequential line across from objective, to individual initiatives within those objectives, then straight into the budget. So it is our balanced scorecard that we run, and we're very pleased with the progress that's been made. It's a whole of organisation approach so that everyone understands what it is we're doing and why we're doing it. In terms of the stats, look, Wendy talked about these. You've heard us talk about them. We're pretty proud of them, so we'll talk about them again. The revenue growth just in the last year, 11.5%, strong growth. We've realigned the strategy, as I said before. Massive increase in our PD and the range of PD that's being offered, and our focus on our respect values. As an organisation, we have a series of values that run through our organisation as respect. We respect our membership, and that's really the thing that we lead with. Every month our team gets together and we ask each other to nominate colleagues in accordance with those respect values, how each of our colleagues have demonstrated the respect values. So it might be, I dare say there's probably going to be a few nominations flowing from the National Congress about the way the team have managed the event. But how are we demonstrating that respect for membership? Because part of that is actually understanding that our members, that you turn the lights on, that every fortnight we do a payroll run and we're able to do that because you pay your fees. Fundamentally, we exist because you support the organisation. And so we never lose sight of that fact. And we have a commitment to understand that when we bring a new person into the organisation, a new staff member, for example, we say, we know our members by name. We have a personal connection with members. I mean, every Monday I get a report still of members that we admitted the week before. We had a massive week last week with over 187 new members, but every week we get a list of members that were admitted. And I set myself a benchmark when I came to the role to say I want to contact every single new member to say welcome. And the insight that's gained from doing that is really profound, that we have a personal connection. And my theory is if I can't do it, then how can we expect the rest of the team to do it? Because I do believe that's one of our strongest competitive advantages, is that we are closer to our membership. We have a very strong relationship with you. We understand your needs and we can design and support our support services accordingly. So it's something that we're very proud of. Our cash reserves are up, and as I'm sure you'll appreciate, being accountants, that the old saying around cash, it is so important, of course. And so to have reserves up over $7 million. In light of the investment we've made in ICT and our rebrand, it's a strong position to be in. In terms of small business, We've created the nation's first Australian small business white paper. So we've brought together industry groups, government, the opposition at a federal level, regulators, policymakers, small businesses themselves. So we ran a national event in Canberra in June, where we had a roundtable discussion with people like Kate Carnell, the Chief Executive of ACCI and others, to discuss the future of small business in Australia. We produced a white paper which linked back to academic research, because we felt that for too long the voice in small business had been plagued by self-interest and minority interest without actually having a legitimate focus on a genuine discussion and discourse about the future of small business. And it's very easy for us to look at an academic paper and say, oh, here's a piece of academic research. But for us, we said we want to link up the academic research with the practice. And so we brought together small businesses and our members and practitioners and said, what do you think? Here are, initially at least, here are 6 policy areas that we think are important to small business. Tell us if you think it's rubbish. And what we had out of that process was really forthright discussion and debate. And it resulted in us adding a 7th area around training needs for small business. But we took that policy paper and we said, well, it's great to have that national input, that's fantastic. But wouldn't it be great to test it even further on the road? And so the team and I took off and we went around the country and we took it to local communities. We ran roundtables in all over the country, including Darwin, Bunbury, Parramatta, Albury, in metropolitan. Rather than going into CBDs, we actually took it directly to communities of small businesses. We had hundreds and hundreds of inputs into the process. So we now have a very robust white paper that we can go to government at all levels in terms of federal, state and local, because a lot of the small business regulation we know is local and state government regulation, and say, here's some tested policy concepts linked with regulation, linked with the regulators and industry and so forth, but also backed by academic research and benchmarked around the world. And here's some legitimate ways for us to reduce the burden on small business. And it has a focus on driving productivity. So we're delighted with the progress of that white paper. So our advocacy continues. The future of financial advice reforms, it's very much a bouncing ball around the changes. Of course, in the last couple of days, the government's announced a negotiation with the opposition to try and resolve the uncertainty that exists around the future of financial advice reforms, but it's been quite profound that FOFA has, we thought FOFA wasn't necessarily going to be front page news, but it has turned out to be that case. Obviously, in an unpredictable Senate, it makes things a bit difficult. But we expect that certainty to creep in due course. So My Public Accountant platform has been another way we've led the profession, a range of comprehensive services to our members in practice, around 4,000 accounting practices serving hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of clients around the country. Our commitment is to give you the best possible services that we can. Wendy talked about exposure. Media exposure is another great example. Our media team do a great job. Almost 300% increase in our exposure in our media hits. Social media has continued to explode. Our I Love Small Business campaign is another great forum that we've been running, linked with our Australian Small Business White Paper. Publications continue to be highly valued. But I think the point down the bottom is really what we're talking about here is in addition to the bespoke financial services package, is that we do things differently. Some people have said to me just in the last day or so, coming to this conference, they go to other congresses and it's got a different feel about it. And you can't create that, you can't manufacture that. I think it is a fact of life that our organisation is different, and we're proud of that. And it's because we're able to provide services in a very different and much more unique and tailored way. Just in terms of the member experience, I talked about the Masters of Commerce, which we are very proud of. It's been increased in terms of the size, the Masters of Commerce from 8 to 12 units, which gives us greater flexibility for the Masters streams and specialisations, which is great. The increase in the research outputs, we've partnered with Deakin University to put our money where our mouth is and said we want to have some tested research papers in small business, and so we're funding a research partnership with Deakin to actually have direct policy input in relation to academic work. Our website's been completely rebuilt, and I mentioned before, since over the last 4 or 5 years, more than $4.5 million of your money has been invested in our ICT infrastructure, which is all about that notion of being fit for the future and making sure we have the infrastructure that's right to leverage the business well into the future. So we're very pleased with that investment, and it's set us up for many years to come. Well, in your own businesses, if you don't spend money on it now, it will catch up with you eventually. Our national events, including obviously our congresses, but also our Tax Agents Guide, has been really important. And the program, as I said before, we can see that it's been well received because we've had over 55% increase in the number of enrolments in the IPA program. Our membership growth, you've probably heard us talk about the amalgamation that's on the table between the Institute of Public Accountants and the Institute of Financial Accountants in the UK. We're really delighted with the way that's progressed, because when you take the IFA and you look at its composition, the profile of its members, the market that it serves, it is, put simply, a smaller version of the IPA. So this amalgamation will create the world's largest SME specialised accountancy group with more than 35,000 professional accountants around the world. We now have members in more than 62 countries around the world, and this will take us even further. But importantly, it means we'll take a much stronger leadership position on the global stage around issues facing small and medium practice and small and medium enterprise, and we're delighted with that. We expect this transaction to be completed by the end of the calendar year. We have a transition team working on it literally as we speak. But there's a member vote of the IFA taking place because, of course, they need to vote to come across, if you like, to amalgamate with us. So we bring our 26,000, they bring their 9,000, which is a great move. So we've continued the growth of our practices. Our China growth, as Wendy pointed out, has been continue to be strong. Vietnam, we're exploring that as a market. We've signed an MOU with the Vietnam Association of Certified Public Accountants as well. Our China model has continued to expand as well. Now examinations, platinum approved employer, delegations across to Australia with the top talent of the Chinese profession coming to Australia. And we were very pleased recently to celebrate our 10-year membership awards throughout our offices in China. We have permanent offices of the IPA in Beijing, Shanghai and Guangzhou. and a presence in more than 13 provinces through member service centres and training centres throughout China. It is the largest presence of an Australian accounting body in mainland China. In terms of where we've come from, just to give you some idea, look at the numbers, as I'm sure you'll appreciate. It's not too early in the morning for numbers, as we know. So just in terms of this notion of efficiency, when we talk about membership here, we're talking here in 2009 of 22,000 members and students, and now here in 2014, 26,000 members. But just to give you an idea, see the uplift in the revenue, but importantly, I think the thing we want to focus on is these quality services are being delivered by the same number of staff. And so our staff are working very hard and harder as the days go by, because they realise what's possible, and we've been able to celebrate those successes, but importantly because we have a strong plan for the future. And we were delighted with the notion of being recognised recently, just in the last year or two, as one of Australia's most innovative companies by BRW, and in fact the most innovative accounting organisation. So our rebrand's been delivered, and we've repositioned. I mentioned before the ICT investment, and our efficiency remains our focus, and I'm delighted obviously with Wendy's appointment as President and Chair of the Board, that I know it's something very dear to Wendy's heart, and I've heard the message, Wendy. But the issues around making sure the organisation is as efficient as possible. We all know in our own business, or in your own businesses, that efficiency really is the key to make sure that before you go and do something, does it add value? Is it going to generate a return? And if not, really question before you kick it off. So we're continuing to focus on efficiencies. Just in terms of the future of accounting in the brief time available, we can talk for the rest of the conference. I know there's some great streams coming up. I think I know that Sholto McPherson and others are doing some streams in relation to the future of accounting, and certainly in terms of technology. Great exhibitors talking about the use of technology here at the Congress as well. But it is having a profound impact on the way the market works and the way business works. And it goes beyond the cloud. We had the World Congress of Accountants recently, and there's considerations there about what impact 3D printing will have on logistics. The movement of stock and goods and services. The fact that 3D printing, someone remarked it won't be long before the world's first 3D printed car will be moved around in a driverless way and will need to be accounted for by someone on one side of the transaction or the other. So the way that financial information and non-financial information is being conveyed around the world is changing as well. So they all have a profound impact on the way the profession works and the way we as a professional body resource that as well. Just in terms of IT, excuse me, this is some stats around smartphones and the use of smartphones. 8%, in 2009, 8% of the population used a mobile to access the internet in 2009. Now, 65% of the population uses a smartphone. It's quite profound. 100 minutes a day spent on browsing the internet. Do you spend 100 minutes? Would you even realise you're spending 100 minutes a day? Thanks, Wendy. On browsing the internet? It's staggering. So the use of social media and the way it's penetrating our lives, and importantly the way business is responding to social media, we know in our own organisation it's such a massive importance, is amazing. We know in the way in which you digest our content, as good as the journal is. We know from you've told us that you do like to receive video content, that it's much better and more efficient just to receive a quick 5-minute video update on some of the quick changes in the profession, as well as the backed up by the technical content behind it. So the question is, what's your digital media strategy? Do you have one? Only 19% of businesses in Australia do. So here's an opportunity for you to become aware of those opportunities, to actually then advise your clients and the businesses you're working with, because it is a huge potential. This is something that I've sort of just been pondering, this notion of, you look around the Congress. I did it this morning, just walking in. I don't like sort of quoting myself, but this is something that we talk about the 6 degrees of separation. I think in many ways we're talking really about the 45 degrees of separation. You walk around the Congress during the breaks and even this morning and other times, what are we doing with our smartphones? We've got our face down, looking down at our smartphone or our device, and it really is separating us from reality, from having the human interactions one-on-one. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. I'm not saying there's a bad thing. But it's just the reality of the way in which the world operates. And so what we've got to acknowledge is the fact, from our point of view in engaging with students, it's the way students are actually interacting and communicating with each other, and the way they expect to be communicated with from organisations like us. So if we're not customising our content now, it creates a real problem for actually cutting through to get our message across. And if you can't read the slide down the bottom, that's, by the way, it's not one of my children, although having just returned from overseas on travel, I did say to somebody last night that I think posthumously Steve Jobs deserves a Nobel Prize, because when our 4-year-old went off the reservation, he was just handed an iPad, which was great. But it's not one of our children sitting there. But you've seen it at cafes where children are handed a device to placate them. It's just the way in which we operate. And the accounting profession is really very much a refugee to technology, whereas the students coming in are indigenous to it. So unless we're actually customising our systems and the way in which we're communicating accordingly, we're going to have a problem. The palm down there says, if you can read this, somebody stole my iPhone. I've talked about this small business white paper. It's available on our website to have a look at. We're going through the process of refining that and having it tested by one of the world's leading academics in SME advocacy, Professor Mark Cowling from Brighton University in UK. So we expect to have that finalised in the first quarter of next year, and we'll be presenting that to government through, as we hope, a national press club process to government early in the new year. But we're delighted with where it's going. I've spoken about the outreach and so forth, so I'll just, in the interest of time, skip through. Just finally, in terms of the new role, what's the new role for an accountant in the 21st century? And this is something that is very dear to our hearts and our advocacy and what we do. But it's about, we know accountants are the trusted advisor to small business. We hear that all the time. But we're taking that one step further and saying, well, actually, what the role that an accountant has is as a trusted productivity advisor, helping clients and the businesses you're working in do things faster, smarter, and at lower cost. And if we can get that right, the opportunities are immense, because we know that Australia faces a huge productivity challenge. Our productivity has been growing significantly in the last 10 years. But it won't continue automatically. It's been buffered by our terms of trade. They've been very strong, but they're set to drop away. If you look at the Treasury stats, in fact, in the white paper, we've got those charts that point to the productivity dropping away. For Australia to maintain the 2.2% growth, in fact, maintain growth in income levels that we've seen, we need productivity up over 3%, which has never, ever been achieved in Australia's history. And our thesis is that in order to achieve that, you've got to unlock the potential of small business. You know, government has to step back from small business and allow it to flourish. But importantly, it requires groups like us to go to government and say, specifically, here are the things you can do to take the burden off small business. It's just far too easy to go to governments and say, remove the regulatory burden. But what's a little bit more difficult is to say, here's where you do it and how. So that's what we've taken up the challenge to say, let's stop with the motherhood around easing the regulatory burden, and let's go to the heart of what it is that's causing small businesses the grief. So that's what's driving that productivity focus, and we believe that provides accountants with the ability to provide that trusted productivity advice to their clients. So the organisation, it's fair to say, we celebrated our 90th birthday last year, but we've, in 91 years really has brought us to this point where we're in a very strong position, a strong institute, but importantly backed by very strong and loyal members, and we're delighted with the turn up here at the National Congress, importantly. We've got a great board in place and everyone is committed, and I've said to people outside of the organisation, it's hard to imagine things better when the board have such a strong vision, when management's committed to that vision and delivering it. We have a great relationship both between management and the board, but importantly backed by the support of the staff and more importantly, the support of members. So we do have a very strong and clear destination in sight to continue the growth of the Institute, to support you and your clients and the businesses they work with, but to really make Australia the best place in the world to start and run a small business. So thank you very much. Enjoy the Congress, and I look forward to meeting up with as many as you as possible. Thank you very much.